Okay, so this video is here to explain the 22nd nakshatra, which is known as Shravana nakshatra. This is a nakshatra that falls in between 10 degrees of Capricorn to 23.20 degrees of Capricorn. The deity that rules this nakshatra is Vishnu, but more specifically is his, I believe, his fifth incarnation, which is known as the Vamana avatar. And the sexual animal associated with this nakshatra is the female monkey. The symbolism for this nakshatra is 3 footprints or 3 footsteps or an ear. And the planet that rules and controls this nakshatra is the moon. So, and also the Shakti, like the energy or the ability of this nakshatra, is a power to connect with others. So, let's get into this nakshatra, which I got a lot of notes on my phone about. One thing you would see with people who probably got a bunch of planets, prominent planets in this side of Capricorn, is that they would be very attractive, likely. Why? Because for one, it's a moon ruled nakshatra. And if you think about all the moon ruled nakshatras, they are sort of very attractive. You have Rohini, you have Hasta, and you have this. Rohini is where the moon is exalted, and as for Shravana, the deity of it is Vishnu. And Vishnu is always described as being beautiful and attractive, even in maybe some of his less seemingly appealing incarnations, like his incarnation of when he transformed into a giant boar. It was stated that he was still beautiful. And he also has the ability to transform into his woman incarnation, known as the Mohini avatar, who is supposed to be very beautiful and stuff. So by those two inclinations, I was able to connect that to Hasta nakshatra. But and then the moon itself, the moon spirit Chandra, it stated that all 27 of the nakshatras are like his wives, and that he ended up having an affair and getting the wife of Jupiter pregnant. So the moon nakshatras can be very attractive. So naturally you could see people with a bunch of planets in Shravana. They could be very attractive people. But another thing that you can see with these people is, first, think about Vishnu. Vishnu is one of the major 3 trinities of one of the major 3 Hindu gods in Hinduism. His name sort of means like the all-pervasive one, He's this omnipresent being, this omnipresent God. It's stated that, from his belly button or from his navel, a stem grew out of his navel, and then a lotus bloomed, and out of that lotus, the god of creation, Lord Brahma, was born, and then Lord Brahma then began creating and giving birth to all this life. So it's like Vishnu is like at the root and center of creation, and it's one interpretation, especially in the Bhagavad Gita, it's like essentially, we are like living within his body in a sense. We're living like within the body of Vishnu. And when you think about when you think about stuff from that perspective, and you understand that the motivation of this nakshatra is Artha. Artha means like, what we do to make a living, wealth and material pursuits. It shows us that people in this nakshatra, they have the ability and capability to damn near attain any material, possession in this world if they put their mind to it. Because, if the deity of this nakshatra is Vishnu, and it's stated that this whole universe, this whole existence is basically a part of his body or within his body, then that means that you have access to everything that is within your body. You have access to everything that is within your realm, within your grasp. So these people on one side, because there's many different aspects of sides to this nakshatra, on one side, people with planets in Shravana nakshatra, they could be very, material oriented, goal oriented. They could want to obtain the wealth. Or on the other side, these people could really love yoga and become very, spiritual and divine beings. It just depends on which side do they want to feed and nurture. And the stories that I'm about to tell you will show you and explain the two different sides that a person with Shravana can lean towards. So, let's do the most famous storytelling of this nakshatra. So, it's stated that there was this demon known as Mahabali, and he ended up like taking over like some lands and he ended up conquering and taking over like some lands and worlds of and dimensions of the devas, the benevolent gods and stuff. And I believe Indra came to Vishnu and asked him for help to regain his land, or regain, some of these lands that this demon Mahabali had took him. So Vishnu, he reincarnates himself into this dwarf Brahmin child, and as this dwarf Brahmin child known as Vamana, he goes to this demon Mahabali and he requests 3 steps worth of land. And the demon was, surprised that this child only wants 3 steps worth of land, because that's like nothing. But the child, Vishnu in the form of this dwarf Brahmin, hit him with some philosophical stuff and essentially told him, that's all I need. And after hearing the dialogue of this child, the demon's teacher, the demon's guru, known as Shukracharya, who is essentially the personification of the planet Venus, who is a demon, who is a guru, who is the advisor and the teacher of the asuras, of the demons and stuff. His teacher, Shukracharya, told Mahabali that do not give this man any land. He is Vishnu, and he will take your land. But the demon Mahabali didn't want to listen. So, what happens? In some attempt to give an attempt to the teacher made an attempt to stop Mahabali from giving the land to the dwarf Brahmin child, and in the process, some way somehow, he ends up getting his eye poked and stabbed by the dwarf Brahmin. And this is why we see that some interpretations of Shukracharya, he's depicted having one eye, is because Vishnu in his incarnation as a dwarf Brahmin child ends up stabbing and poking his eye out because Shukracharya attempted to intervene with him gaining these 3 steps of land. So the demon ends up granting this dwarf Brahmin child the 3 steps worth of land, and the dwarf child, Vishnu in his child form, ends up revealing his real form. He ends up transforming into a giant, and within 2 steps he was able to regain and conquer the land and territory that was ran over by these demons. And he had one more step. He had a 3rd step, and he suggested and asked where should he place his 3rd step at, because he conquered all the land and regained the land that he needed to gain. And the demon Mahabali, realizing or witnessing like the greatness of Vishnu or whatever, said, you can step on me, you can step on my head. He just accepted his defeat, and he was killed and squished by Vishnu and this dwarf Brahmin form child. So what can we take from this story? One thing we can take from this story is that Shravana people, they can potentially become like Mahabali. They can become this demon who gains all of this land. They can be someone who conquers and gain all this land and conquer all this material possession, and they can become drunk off of their possessions and become very egotistic, and they can end up not listening to people who is more informed in matters and situations than them. And it shows us that Shravana people, they shouldn't really get too attached to their material possessions, because you can lose it at any time, just like Mahabali did. And it shows us that if these people become very immoral, if these people probably become very immoral people, very egotistical people because of their material wealth and possessions, then someone in the form of, someone in a sense in their life. Someone in their life could play the role of Vishnu, could play the role of that dwarf Brahmin child, and come in their life and humble them and take away their material possessions, in a sense, to sort of treat them a lesson, to teach them a lesson. We see that a Shravana person, they need to listen to their guru. They need to listen to their teacher, or listen to people who are more informed and knowledgeable in things than they are. Because if they don't, they could end up losing that deal. They could end up suffering some huge consequence, and due to their actions. We see that these people could potentially be prone to eye injuries, just like the Guru Shukracharya was in this story. He ended up being blinded because he tried to advise and stop, this demon from making a bad decision. But, he ended up getting injured. So these people, they can end up, being very prone to eye injuries. And then on the flip side, you could be like Vishnu. You could be like the dwarf Brahmin child. Because what do we learn from this? Another thing we learn from this story is the cleverness of Vishnu. Vishnu is one of the most clever deities in Hinduism. He's very slick, he's very clever, and is very much displayed in this story of his dwarf Brahmin child incarnation. He goes and takes a very unassuming form. He's a dwarf, and a dwarf Brahmin, a demon who conquered all this land. The last thing he's worried about is like some child, being a threat to him. So a Shravana person, they can sometimes potentially take a very unassuming, they can have an unassuming demeanor, or they could be very underestimated sometimes. But even though these people can be underestimated, through skill and tact, they can end up rising to the top. They can end up ascending to the throne in their field or possession. Like, you might come into a job of a big fancy business and you be a janitor and no one thinks nothing of you. But somehow, you climb up the ladder of that job corporation. Now you got an office, and now you're excelling and doing better than people who are more qualified or been there longer than you. And it's like, how the hell did this person who was just at this lowly position ascend to great heights? So you can see that, and you see the symbolism. You see the 3 footsteps. Within 3 footsteps, everything was taken care of. The first 2 footsteps, he conquered land and territory. The final footstep, he ended up killing the demon, or in a more metaphorical, spiritual sense, he ended up crushing the person's ego. These people, they can, like I said, if you decide to embody the nature of Mahabali and become very drunk off your material possessions and very egotistical and immoral, then someone in your life could come in, take a very unassuming role, have a very unassuming demeanor, and you can underestimate them. And after you underestimate them, you'll end up, suffering. You'll end up maybe taking like some bad loss in a deal in some business, and you become humbled because you've been knocked off from your throne. You thought that you was untouchable. You thought that you was the best. You thought that, money and material was everything. Then someone comes in your life and they take it all away. It could be in the form of a wife and a divorce. It could be in the form of a lawsuit. It could be in the form of something. It could be the IRS, but you just lose all your possessions or most of your possessions, and it humbles you. It teaches you a lesson. And like I said, you could be Vishnu. You could come in someone's life and you can humble them, or you can just be very underestimated. But another thing you see with a Shravana person is that when it comes to them doing things in their life, you just see a theme of triplicities in their life. They could always probably have 3 different things going on, or it could probably take them 3 steps in order to conquer and do something. That's one thing that you would notice with a Shravana. So essentially, for a Shravana person, if at first they don't succeed at something, they should most definitely try again. And another thing with a Shravana person is that these people can become like great researchers. Because think about it. If, from a Hindu perspective, if the universe, our existence, is within the body of Vishnu, you know, if the universe, if everything is within the body of Vishnu, when we discover something, we're not really discovering something. We're essentially rediscovering something that God has already created. We're rediscovering something that has already been there, you know? So when you view things from that sense, we're sort of researchers. Humanity, humans, we don't really, discover things. We rediscover things. There is nothing that we have discovered or created that God hasn't already left here for us, or that God just wasn't aware of, We're just, as humans, we're natural rediscoverers. We're natural researchers, So, like I said, we just reface from that perspective. You can see that Shravana people, they can naturally research oriented when you view things from that perspective. These people could develop an interest in yoga. Now, the word yoga means union. And yoga are disciplines and techniques and mantras and methods that is supposed to calm and still, the mind. And the word yoga, like I said, means union. And you can interpret these techniques and methods that calm and still the mind. They could, develop a union with your mind, body, and soul. And or yoga techniques can make you develop a union with God. Make you develop a union with a higher power. And what did I tell y'all was the Shakti of this nakshatra? It's the ability to connect with others. But more so, it is the ability to connect with higher beings, with maybe extraterrestrial beings, or connect with, divinities, Connect with divinities and higher powers through stillness, through listening, which is why one of the symbolisms of this nakshatra is the ear. Because to really hear something, you sort of need to, you need to focus, or you need to be still. You can't really hear something if you got a bunch of noise and distractions. You can't hear this. You can't hear the subtleness of things if there's potentially a lot of noise. Like try to meditate, and through your meditation in a quiet, nice room or whatever, in a room that's not, or an environment that's not too noisy, try to see and pay attention to all the little things that you can hear and notice that you wouldn't have heard and noticed if you had the TV on, if you had a bunch of music on. Just see the subtle things that you can notice and hear in a room that's almost completely silence, So these people, they can connect with things and connect to higher powers through their stillness. Like I said, one way of practicing yoga, which is more commonly known and expressed in America, is physical yoga, postures and exercises. But that's one aspect. Other aspects of yoga, is mantras and meditations, or just teachings that can, help you calm and still and conquer the mind. And the Patanjali Yoga Sutras talks in great depth and detail about yoga. And there's one story or one interpretation or theory about Patanjali, who is stated to be this great author of, of teaching yoga. And I got it from the Komala Sutton book, on her Nakshatras book. And I believe she uses this story as an example to express the natures and qualities of the Slasha Nakshatra. And the story goes like this. Many people believe that Patanjali is a incarnation of Sesha, who is the mount, who is the companion, the serpent companion of Lord Vishnu. Some people believe that he is an incarnation of that Naga, Sesha. And it stated that Sasha came to Earth to learn, he either came to Earth to learn yoga from Lord Shiva. And or he seen Lord Shiva and was mesmerized by his dancing. And in the process of being mesmerized or wanting to learn to dance, he ended up being taught yogic techniques. And I believe it stated that Shiva instructed Patanjali, instructed this incarnation of Sasha to, just don't teach these sacred techniques to just anyone. So it stated that Patanjali, he had students and who he taught, who was teaching, but he would always hide behind a curtain or something. They would never see his face, or they would never see his full body or something. So the students one day, they got real nosy and curious and wanted to see the face of their teacher, this face of their master. And when they pulled the curtains back and seen his face, they ended up being blinded by the light of his eyes or whatever. And there was only one student who wasn't blinded by this serpent, by Patanjali. And that is because that student was running late for, the class or whatever. So what do we take from this story that very much so aligns with Shravana nakshatra? It shows us that you need to listen to your teacher. You need to listen to your guru. You need to listen to your master. You need to listen to people who are more intelligent in matters than you are, or else you will suffer. Because you see, and it's funny, in both of these stories I told you, the person didn't listen to the teacher, and in the process of it, somebody ends up getting blinded, which highlights the potential of eye injuries or, eye problems with Shravana people. And yeah. So another thing with Shravana nakshatra is, like I told you, the cleverness of this nakshatra. And I'm about to highlight some of the cleverness that Vishnu displays in, some of his incarnations or one of his stories. But there's so many incarnations that I can discuss, so I'm just trying to just keep it simple. And I will discuss the churning of the ocean to get my point across. So here is briefly me paraphrasing the story of the churning of the ocean. It is stated that, the gods, the devas, they were sort of losing to the asuras, the demons. The gods, to my understanding, the devas, they was weakened or cursed to some extent, and they just needed to get their strength, their power restored, so that they can compete with the compete with the demons, compete with the asuras. So some of the devas, they go to Vishnu and ask for assistance in regards to what should they do, and Vishnu tells them that, hey, you need to go to this ocean of milk, and we need to churn it, and we need to throw all these herbs and all these vegetables and all these good positive things into this ocean of milk, and we need to stir it, and for us stirring it, we should gain the Amrita, which is also known as Soma, this elixir that the gods and the devas drink. He said, by doing this, we can, drink this elixir, and we will regain our strength, we will regain our power, and we'll be on maybe equal playing fields, if not better, than the asuras, than the demons. But Vishnu tells the devas that a task this big of churning and stirring this ocean, the celestial ocean body of milk, would be a great task, and it would take the efforts of the demons and the devas to stir and churn this ocean of milk. So Vishnu devised this plan. He told them that, we will convince the asuras to help us, and we'll tell them that in return, we'll let them drink this elixir too with us if they help us. But Vishnu assured them that the demons are never going to really get their hands on this elixir. It's just a lie. It's just a trick. So, to speed up this lengthy story, eventually the devas convinced the demons to help them, stir this ocean of milk. They end up eventually like ripping off like the pillar of a mountain and using it in the middle of the ocean as a rod. And then they took Vasuki, who was this huge Naga, and they ended up wrapping him around this pillar of the mountain. And the demons, the Asuras, on one end of the snake grab him, and the gods, the devas, they grab the other end of the snake and grab it, and they constantly twist and turn, pushing and pulling the snake, stirring this ocean of milk until the thing that they're looking for is born and comes out of it. And eventually this soma, this amrita, this elixir that would give the gods and restore the gods their strength and power that they have sort of lost, emerges. And there's like this fight or war that breaks out between the devas and the asuras, and Vishnu reincarnates into one of his incarnations known as Mohini, who is a woman who is stated to be very beautiful. And this woman, in this incarnation of a woman, he greatly distracts the demons. He greatly distracts the asuras, and they are just too mesmerized by his woman incarnation that they end up not getting this elixir. But there was one asura who was able to get some of the elixir through deception. That asura his name is Shravana. He ends up changing his appearance, and he impersonated himself as one of the devas or whatever, and he ends up getting a little bit of the soma. But the luminaries, the sun and moon spirit, they was able to see through the deception of Shravana, and they informed Vishnu that this demon, he got some of the elixir, and Vishnu ends up decapitating the demon Shravana. They decapitates him, and the head of him becomes Rahu, and the rest of the body of that dragon, of that Shravana, of that demon, becomes known as Ketu. And thus you have the origin story of Rahu and Ketu, and thus you sort of have the end of my story of the turn of the ocean. But from that story, you've seen how clever and slick Vishnu was, and how he devised this plan to deceive the demons in order to gain this elixir to help restore the strength and power of the devas. And there's many little tellings and stories accordingly of his 8th incarnation, Krishna, and how Krishna would use deceiving tactics in the Mahabharata war to gain the advantage on his enemies. So Vishnu in his incarnations are not, they're not too proud, or they're not ashamed at all to use clever and underhanded methods in order to reach a goal and task. So with that being said, you can see that Shravana people can be very slick, very calculated, and very clever, and they might look charming and innocent, but they should not be underestimated, because that person, they can take you down. They can take your position, they can take your spot, they can gain victory over you because you underestimated them. What else by looking at my notes? In Vishnu's 8th incarnation as Krishna, we learn in the Bhagavad Gita that Krishna tells people, or tells Arjuna, that you can sort of live within this world and also be very spiritual. You can be involved and have material possessions and maybe have a family or whatever, and still keep up your spiritual practices. Some people, they completely try to renounce the material world in favor of a more spiritual one. But we learn in the Bhagavad Gita, in Vishnu's 8th incarnation as Krishna, that he doesn't really, promote harsh austerities. He doesn't really promote, harsh renunciation. And that it is possible to be immersed within the world and live a spiritual life. So what can we take from that little known fact from the Bhagavad Gita, who is about the 8th incarnation of Vishnu? We see that with Shravana people, these people, they can embody, the desire to have a bunch of nice luxury material possessions, and they can also be very spiritual, you know. They can have a nice house, a nice car, all these nice things, and they can still travel the world and hold spiritual seminars and lectures and inform you about the subtleties and intricacies of life and God and divinity. And some people, they might think, well, if you're so spiritual and all this stuff, why do you have all these material possessions? But, you know, just because you have nice things and nice luxurious things, it doesn't mean that you can't be spiritual. It doesn't mean that you can't be divine. So, you know, we see that with a Shravana person, they have the potential and the capacity to be a spiritual person, be a spiritual leader, be a religious figure or whatever, and also possess material possessions, but also not let those material possessions corrupt their moral, correct, and not let it corrupt their conduct, you know, like you might see with, you know, modern day pastors or other people who are in high positions of, you know, religious authority. You know, they can be in high positions of power, and they could be taking all the money from the congregation, and then you later find out that they're involved in like some sexual scandal or something, or you find some foul news erupts and comes out and stuff. But these people, they have the ability, you know, to have the nice car, the nice house, the gold and all this stuff, but also, you know, they realize that I can lose all this stuff at any moment, and these possessions are nice, and I'm grateful for them, but they do not make me. And I do not see or view myself as better because I have these things over people who do not have them. So you can see that. You can also potentially see a Shravana person. They can be very territorial over their material possessions. They can become like Mahabali. You know, they can gather all this material stuff, and they might not want to give it away. Or, you know, they could be like Vishnu when he took his Brahman dwarf incarnation, and he might be willing to crush and step on people who try to mess with his land, mess with his property. So we can see that a Shravana person, they can be very territorial over their material possessions and all that good stuff. You can also see that a Shravana person, they could develop followers. They can really develop great followers and whatnot. You know, they could have devoted followers. The reason I say this is because of Vishnu's seventh incarnation as Lord Ram, as Lord Rama. You know, the stories of his life is depicted in the story known as the Ramayana, the Ramayana, and it is stated that he is greatly accompanied by the deity known as Hanuman, who is theorized to some people to be an incarnation of Shiva, but Vishnu, in the incarnation of Rama, he had this monkey god Hanuman be with him as he accompanied him on his journey to you know, save his wife. And another thing about Vishnu is that it's stated that in all, or at least most of his incarnations, he is always accompanied by an incarnation of his snake, who is known as the Mahanaga, Adisesha, or sometimes known as the King of the Nagas. But you know, Vishnu, it's stated that he lays on like the bottom of like a celestial ocean, and he is laying on this serpent as a bed while he has his wife Lakshmi rubbing and massaging his feet. And it is stated that when Vishnu incarnates, that snake, his serpent, also reincarnates with him to accompany him, and that his companion, that the incarnation of his snake Sesha, will typically tend to die before he does. So therefore, when Vishnu dies, when his incarnation dies, he can be prepared to serve and be a bed for Vishnu, you know. So we can see that these people could just really have devoted loyal followers and a fan base. And Hanuman, the reason I mentioned the Hanuman is because the sexual animal of this is a female monkey. Even though Hanuman is depicted to be a male, you can still just make the connections with this nakshatra and Hanuman because of the relationship of a monkey being involved. Hanuman has followers, and one of the main reasons that he can have a lot of devoted followers is because it is stated that worshiping or praising Hanuman can help lower and lessen the negative effects of people who have Saturn. I mean, everybody got Saturn. It can just reduce the negative effects of Saturn. And there's many different interpretations and tellings of the story and tale, but essentially it's sort of stated that either Saturn's father, son, aka Surya, wanted Hanuman to teach Saturn a lesson. Another interpretation is that along the path and way of Hanuman flying around the world, trying to help Lord Ram find his wife, he ends up finding Shani, aka Saturn, who was trapped or imprisoned somewhere, and Hanuman ends up freeing Saturn. And after he freed Saturn, Saturn was like, I thank you for saving me or rescuing me, and I'll grant you any wish that you desire. And essentially the wish that Hanuman wanted was that, he wanted to be immune from the negative effects of Saturn, and that he wanted the people who followed and worshiped Hanuman to also be protected from the negative effects of Saturn. So it's because of these tales and stories of Hanuman being granted this wish to be protected, and for his followers to also be protected from the negative effects of Saturn, that Hanuman has developed a lot of followers. So you see that these people can develop a lot of followers. And then also you see the symbolism of this nakshatra. One of the symbolisms of the nakshatra is free footsteps or free footprints. These people could end up leaving a mark on the world. Vishnu is, like I told you, he's one of the major free Hindu deities in Hinduism. He is greatly worshipped, and his incarnations are greatly worshipped. And Hanuman is worshipped. And think about the foot and think about the free steps that Vishnu took in his dwarf incarnation to regain his land. If a giant was to walk and take a walk and step on something, he's going to leave a huge mark on the earth. So these people, they can leave a huge imprint and mark on the world. They can impact people with their knowledge. They can greatly, impact people, leave an impact on people with their knowledge and intelligence. Or they might conquer the world on more so of a materialistic standpoint. They might just have successful businesses running, and they can conquer and leave a mark on the world materialistic wise. Another interpretation of why you see one of the symbolisms of this nakshatra is a footprint is because of this story that is stated that sage Brigu, who is stated to be the son of Brahma, one day he wanted to test to see who was the greatest, supreme godhead. He wanted to see who was the supreme and the best, personification of God and divinity out of Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu. So he conducted a test. He wanted to test the patience of Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu. So he would deliberately show signs of disrespect or deliberately do things that would anger the three of them to see how they would respond. Brahma, he ended up getting irritated with Brigu. Shiva ended up getting irritated and angry with the sage. But when it came to Vishnu, Vishnu didn't show or display any anger, seemingly, or hostility towards Brigu. Even when Brigu tried to wake Vishnu up and is stated to have repeatedly kicked Vishnu, Vishnu did not wake up and become angry. And instead, there's an interpretation of this story where Shiva is apologizing to Brigu for his lack of hospitality and not preparing for his arrival, and that because of his unpreparedness for the arrival of Brigu, he ends up allowing a footprint of Lord Brigu's foot to be placed and stamped on his chest as like a permanent mark. So through that exercise of Brigu testing the patience of the gods, he came to the conclusion that Vishnu is like it's like this supreme god out of, Brahma and Shiva. But from that story, we see that these people are very patient, and that patientness correlates also with their calculativeness, their ability to be very calculative. Vishnu was very patient. Vishnu is omnipresent. Vishnu is all-knowing. He pretty much knew what was the intentions of Brigu, but he didn't give in to his anger. He didn't give Brigu what he wanted, and he overcame and won. Since essentially Vishnu is consciousness and awareness, you see that a Shravana person, sort of similar to the previous nakshatra, Uttarashada, they gain victory in life through their consciousness and awareness of things. And another thing that you would see of a Shravana person is also tied to the monkey. In Hinduism, or at least in the tales of Lord Rama, the seventh incarnation of Shiva, we are introduced to the Vanaras, who are stated to be these divine, humanoid, monkey-like figures. And it is stated that the characteristics and traits of these monkey, humanoid, divine monkey figures is that they are childish, adventurous, amusing, blunt, honest, loyal, and kind. So you can see those traits manifest in a Shravana person. They can be very goofy. They can be very playful. They can be very loyal. They can be very, blunt and honest. But they're kind also. So, these are the people, they can just be, like I said, they can very much so take a very unassuming appearance or demeanor. They might seem childish. They might seem playful. But even though they can be real childish, even though they can be real playful sometimes, or immature or whatever, they are also very intelligent. They can balance the two, You might think that because they're very childish that they're not smart, that they're not really mature. But there's wisdom behind their goofiness. There's wisdom behind their seemingly unassuming appearance. And in fact, being, optimistic or being playful is a very divine and godly trait. Why do I say that? The reason I say that is because of the word enthusiasm. It's stated that the word enthusiasm comes from the Greek word known as entheos, E-N-T-H-E-O-S. And it's stated that the word E-N, means within, and theos means God. So enthusiasm essentially means God within, to have God within you, to have divinity within you. So we see that people who are optimistic, lighthearted, playful, and joyful, they're very divine. They have God within them. They have a sense of divinity within them. It reminds me of a quote that says that, a sad guru is a sad guru. Meaning, if you're supposed to be this divine spiritual person and you're always sad or constantly being sad and depressed, then, what type of guru and teacher are you? If you're constantly, falling victim to sadness or depression or loneliness all the time, How could you have found God if you're still worried and depressed about these certain type of things? And Vishnu, and even in his incarnations, except for maybe his sixth incarnation, where he takes the incarnation of of a sage or a Brahmin who takes an axe and kills unruly, immoral leaders. And his fourth incarnation, I believe, where he takes the form of this man beast who ends up, ripping and just destroying this person who disrespected his follower. But for the most part, Vishnu isn't a character who's depicted to be very angry and violent. Especially, like, to my understanding, his Krishna avatar. He's not really depicted to be someone who's very angry and or violent. Or maybe someone who is very sad. Matter of fact, it is stated that in Vishnu's 8th incarnation as Krishna, that he was very playful and troublesome. He was a prankster. And Hanuman, he was also someone, when he was a child, who played a lot of tricks and pranks on people. And monkeys, since it's the animal that rules, the sexual animal associated with this nakshatra is a female monkey, they can be very playful too. So we see the essence of childlikeness and playfulness within this nakshatra. These people are very playful and childlike sometimes, but they're also very divine people. And to be, optimistic or goofy and childlike and enthusiastic is divine. Because enthusiasm essentially means to have God or divinity within you. So, yeah, just keep that in mind. To be divine and optimistic and lighthearted is a divine trait. You see it in anime all the time, or in anime and cartoons all the time, where the main character, for the most part, no matter like how serious or messed up a situation is, they are always very happy, or they're always very optimistic, or they don't ever take the situation seriously. You might see something like that happen with a Shravana person, where they never take a situation seriously. They never let their situation and circumstances bum them out. And let me make sure I'm not missing anything else with this nakshatra. You can see that people with this nakshatra, they could probably be very clairaudient, especially if maybe like the 8th lord, or if Rahu or Ketu may come in contact with this nakshatra. They might have the ability to just be very clairaudient, or just really naturally just strongly hear or connect with higher planes of consciousness, or communicate with other beings beyond their 5 senses. You could potentially see that with these people. But like I said, let me just briefly look at all my notes and make sure that I am not missing anything. I'm sorry if this looks real unprofessional and whatnot, but no, that's all I have to say in regards to this nakshatra. I hope that this gave you great clarity in regards to what happens if you have a planet in the side of Capricorn in Shravana nakshatra. And thank you for watching. If you want to go book a breakdown and consultation of your birth chart, go to the About Me section in my YouTube bio and my YouTube page and click the link, and I'll see you in my next video.